going to bring today's episode to the podcast talking all about blood sugar. This is something that we discuss in our clinical mastermind weekly with the Fab Fertile team. We see people with low AMH, high FSH, diminished ovarian reserve, premature ovarian insufficiency. Something is going on with their blood sugar. So whether you're feeling hangry, you have mood swings, you have sugar cravings, or you have poor sleep, looking at your blood sugar and regulating it is key. Excited for you to listen to this episode. Let's go. Hey, Katie, excited to have you back on the podcast.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Awesome. Today we're digging into blood sugar, and this is something that we discuss in our weekly clinical mastermind with our team. So we have a OBGYN with a functional medicine background, our functional nutrition practitioners and fertility mindset coaches. So we all get together and look at client cases to then get all eyeballs on a case. And literally it feels like, the two things we're always talking about is thyroid and also blood sugar. And so many people, if you're feeling hangry, or if you have sleep issues or craving, if you're feeling moody, there could be something going on with your blood sugar. And it's so important when you're on the fertility journey to stabilize your blood sugar. So let's sort of talk about kind of why is that the case and how does it impact our hormones?
Yeah, and a really important question. I think it's so true, Sarah, that when we're thinking clinically with any kind of hormonal picture, and with health at large, we're thinking, I guess two of the biggest fundamentals that I'm always thinking about are, like, number one is gut health, right? We talk about gut health all the time because that's the foundational underpinning for everything. And number two is the blood sugars, because the blood sugar piece is one of those ones where it's a massive strain on the body if it's not stable. And what we're trying to reduce when it comes to stabilizing hormones and fertility and protecting the health of eggs and sperm is stability. Like, this is what the body craves. The body has these mechanisms called homeostasis, and that is making sure that you're not, your temperature is regulated, that the acid base levels in your blood are within a very tight parameters, and also within that is your blood glucose levels. So blood glucose levels really matter as far as homeostasis is concerned. It's part of your emergency system, if you like, because if they're not stable, then our life is at risk if they become that destabilized. So all of our alert systems in our body are geared towards, our brain is very, very clever, and our organ systems are very clever at picking up on our blood glucose levels in real time. And we've got all of these mechanisms in place to say, okay, well, once it starts getting too high, this is what happens. When it starts getting too low, this is what happens. And so in some ways we're very magical and well designed in that respect, but the unfortunate thing is, in the modern world, we have access to so much excess in terms of things that disrupt blood sugars, such as the foods that we eat and our stress levels and our sleep, and everything that we'll delve into in this show. And it's our organs are going on overdrive trying to handle it all, right? And so we'll talk about insulin resistance, but ultimately it's that insulin resistance piece that is the driving factor for so many of the modern day illnesses, right? All of the things that we might term Western diseases. So metabolic disease, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, the big killers of the modern world, right? And so I know we're talking about things in terms of fertility, and sometimes it can be hard to understand why one might link to another, but ultimately what we're trying to tell our bodies when it comes to getting pregnant is, hey, it's safe to have a baby right now. And so we need to be giving our bodies as many messages as possible that, hey, this is a super safe environment and we're ready to have a healthy pregnancy within it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know for years I'd have that like hangry thing where I'd feel nauseous, I feel jittery. I'm like, you better stop the car right now. My husband would keep driving, like I need to eat, and he didn't get it. And I can see it in my daughter too, where the two of us will be out sometimes, and I'm like, I can sometimes see it dip a little bit too for her, where she just becomes like she's like now at least she'll know it's the blood sugar that's something is off. She hasn't eaten properly. And then the two of us will get together like cranky, but not as bad, like not as bad as I used to have it. And I didn't even know. I just thought, I had to always carry snacks in my purse, and this is what you did. And your blood sugar was always up and down all day long. And so that's so common for so many of us. And so let's talk
Yeah,
about insulin.
you touch on, sorry, just to add, Sarah, you touch on such an important point there, which is this concept of the blood sugar roller coaster, right? And your what so many of us end up doing is getting caught in these cycles, and I call it the refined carbohydrate addiction cycle. And it's essentially and it is an addiction cycle, because we, from the start of the day, what we put into our bodies, say we'll have something at the start of the day to break our fast in the morning that will elevate our blood sugars too much. And so what are typical breakfast foods in the Western world? We've got cereals, we've got toast, we've got all of these high carbohydrate foods with not really much else. And so we'll break our fast with those foods. So our blood sugars will go up. And then really from the start of the day, what goes up must come down. And so we get caught in this up, down cycle. And so we go up, we get, our dopamine receptors fire off when we get those, because when we get that sugar hit, our bodies like it. We're evolutionary primed to enjoy that sensation. So we enjoy it. We feel really good for a minute, and we feel that those reward centers kick in. But very soon afterwards, that's as the insulin kicks in and the glucose is dragged out of our system, we're going to drop again. And so really what happens is we don't just go up and then back to the baseline. We go up and then we drop down. And that's when the hanger, the shakes, the moodiness, the crankiness, all of that comes in, right? And this is why loads of people who have breakfast say, oh, well, why do I feel more hungry when I've had breakfast compared to where I don't? And it's because they're on that blood sugar train, and what they've broken their fast with is the thing that's probably spiked their levels too much, and then they're down again. And then you spend the rest of the day, as you mentioned there, with having to have a load of handbag snacks, right? That makes sense, because your body is then crying out, and the only thing that you want in that time, you don't want a boiled egg. No. You want, the chips, the chocolate, the whatever it is that's going to get your blood sugars back up again, because that's what your body is craving. And we get caught in these cycles, and you go round and round, and you spend your whole day in this cycle, and then you get this massive slump at 4 p.m. and you're just exhausted, and you don't know why, and you can't concentrate. I'm sure for so many people listening to this, they're going to identify with that, because it's a pattern that so many people are caught in, and it's a pattern that actually, with the right approach, you can easily get out of.
Absolutely. Yeah. Cause I used to start my day with muffins, like a muffin or a bagel. It was always
Right.
like, yeah, some sort of carb.
Yeah.
And then we
Yeah.
come crashing down. So let's talk about insulin resistance. What is that? And why do we need to be aware of that?
Yeah, so insulin is it's essentially the hormone that's produced by the pancreas in response to blood glucose levels. So, like I said before, our monitoring, our surveillance systems are tight in terms of blood glucose levels. And what happens is when our blood gets flooded with glucose, and glucose, by the way, is, just to be clear, is it's a type of sugar. So it's the most simple form of sugar, and our body can use it directly as energy. But any carbohydrate that we eat, and by the way, carbs are not the enemy here. I'm not anti-carbohydrate, but just to be aware that any carbs that we eat will ultimately get converted at some point into glucose for our body to use as fuel. Now, the difference is if we're eating a food that is really high on the glycemic index, i.e. the glucose index, like simple carbohydrates. So that could be actual sugar. It could be, sugary foods, sweet foods of any description. Or it could be like your white kind of beige carbohydrates, like white rice, white potatoes, all of your cereals, most of your grains, those kind of foods. those will have a similar instant release. And when we have that instant release of glucose into the bloodstream, insulin kicks in to try and deal with that and stabilize those blood glucose levels. And insulin helps shunt some of that glucose over to the liver, where it turns into glycogen, and glycogen will be stored for the rest of that day to see, like, is there any point in the day where this energy can be used up? And if it's not used up, then by the end of the day, it tends to be stored as fatty tissue after that. So it's kind of this conversion process that happens from glucose into fatty tissue. Now, the reason this is important, and the insulin resistance piece, is that actually over time, if our blood glucose levels are flooded all the time and we're on this up down roller coaster all the time, you can imagine our bodies prefer stability, right? We prefer homeostasis. Whereas if we're like this all the time, then those surveillance systems become slightly less attuned to what's going on. And actually what can happen is we become resistant to the insulin that we're producing over time. So we become less sensitized to the insulin, and then our blood sugar levels become even more volatile. And this is then when you're on a track towards that metabolic syndrome piece, the high blood pressure piece, the high cholesterol, the type 2 diabetes, the cardiovascular disease. So this is I guess the railroad to that path, and those are all stressors on the body. And when it comes to hormonal health and fertility, we want to reduce those stressors on the body as much as possible, because if we've got a massive load in the form of all of those stressors, then our body's not really going to be prioritizing reproduction because it thinks that we're in danger.
So we see a lot of people are like exercising. I was talking to someone the other day who was like exercising 4 hours a day, and then at one point it was like 8 hours, like so much exercising, and literally just kept gaining weight, and was vegan and was not, all of that piece. And then it's interesting when you start eating the right diet that's right for you, balancing blood sugar, looking at thyroid, all those things come back into place, and you don't need to be doing that. Because that exercise could then, although we don't want you doing an inactive lifestyle, but vigorous exercise like that can then impact your hormones and have you on this, like, that blood sugar roller coaster.
Yeah, absolutely. It all the body is all connected. This is the thing, right? And we talk about the thyroid, we talk about gut health, we talk about blood sugars and diabetes and all of these things. They're all connected. Like, all of those things are connected. Our body is not a set of standalone systems. We are one organism that communicates with itself all the time. And so these things often tie into one another.
Yeah, so some contributing factors, so obesity, especially belly fat, the inactive lifestyle, diet that's high in carbs, gestational diabetes. Can you talk about that? If someone's dealing with secondary fertility issues, maybe the first pregnancy, they had gestational diabetes. How is that? Like, if they're now trying for their second and struggling, how would that be a factor?
Yeah, I guess it's just to know that gestational diabetes is a risk factor for type 2 diabetes. So I guess in terms of like the warning signs that we get from our bodies and being able to tune in and listen, then actually if you have had type 2, if you have had gestational diabetes in a previous pregnancy, then probably that's something to be mindful of just wondering, putting the question mark out there of, I wonder whether I might have some blood sugar, some even low level blood sugar dysregulation that we might need to address to actually help my chances of conceiving.
Yeah, health conditions like non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, PCOS, family history of diabetes. Definitely want to look at that. Smoking. I think if anyone, people on the fertility journey, people are not smoking. I think it's interesting. Just went to Europe recently and was there probably like maybe, Katie's there all the time because she's in the UK. So usually like a quick little hop and a skip. But for the North Americans, it's a 9 hour, for me, it was a 9 hour plane ride. But it was like when I was there maybe 10 plus years ago, I am never smoked and don't want to smoke. But when I was in France, I was like, maybe I'll take up smoking. Like every single person was smoking. I'm like, what the heck is going on? And now, 10 to 15 years later, I was like, it was intermittent. Like I didn't notice, this was Italy. So I don't know if that would be more different than France, but I don't think so. But there still was smoking. Like even, where was I? I was in Munich and they had it was shocking. The airport is like gorgeous there, so like brand new. And then they had a little room all cordoned off that you could go into, the smoking room, and it was all like filtered air in there. I guess I'm like, filter with what? I have no idea. And a bunch of people were in this room smoking. And I'm like, well, that seems so 1980s. But so there still is the smoking piece, which I'm like, anyone on the fertility journey or anyone in general, I don't think it's a secret that tobacco is not going to be good for our health. It's interesting how things are changing there. Now everyone's vaping. Ethnicity, so more likely if your ancestry is African, Latino, or Native American, age over 45, any kind of hormonal disorders like Cushing's syndrome. And then if you're on medication, so steroids, antipsychotics, and then sleep apnea. That can be our sleep problems. That sleep piece then dysregulates your blood sugar the entire next day. Anything you want to say on any of those, Katie?
Yeah, I guess it's to note that some of these things. So we I guess the primary thing that we're thinking about when thinking blood sugar balance is the food piece, right? And thinking about what we're putting into our body, that's and what the glycemic load is of that food. But having said that, we also know that things such as sleep and stress and cortisol, they really impact the blood sugars as well. So sleep, yes, poor sleep will automatically increase cortisol levels, and cortisol can disrupt blood glucose levels. If we think about this fight or flight type response, then really what happens in that as part of that fight or flight mechanism is that actually our bodies almost want there to be glucose in the bloodstream, because we want to be able to use that to run or fight if we need to, right? And so that's the basic link between the cortisol and the blood sugars. But so poor sleep, even just one night of poor sleep, will automatically raise your cortisol levels the next day. But interestingly, poor sleep, again, just one night of poor sleep alone, will also impact your appetite and satiety hormones, leptin and ghrelin. And once those are out of balance, then we're far more likely to crave and really have those physiological cravings and needs for those higher carbohydrate foods. And so if you have a bad night's sleep and you're like reaching for the donuts the next day, it's not just because you've got poor willpower, it's because you've got that physiological mechanism is in place. And so it's these are all things to be mindful of.
So let's talk about some of the functional reference ranges for blood sugar, what to look for. Because many times, your doctor can scan down your blood work, tell you everything is normal, but is it optimal? We need it to be optimal for fertility and optimal for optimal health. And it could be a factor. And it's super frustrating where you're like, wait, my AMH is low, my FSH is high, but I've had people tell me, yeah, my health is fine. And it's just not the case. Otherwise, you'd already be pregnant. Like there's other factors. And so it's really important to, especially if you've been told things are normal and you're like, I don't really know what to do, that to look at these from a functional standpoint. So the functional reference ranges for blood sugar, can you kind of talk about those and what we're looking for?
So when we're just talking about a standalone blood sugar for fasting blood sugars, then we're looking at around about 80 to 90 milligrams per deciliter. So these are US measures rather than UK or Europe. So just look up a translation if you need to. But these are. I guess it's this concept that we talk about a lot, Sarah, of the functional ranges being optimal ranges. And so what we'd like to see is, this fasting blood sugar levels, and then ideally within 2, maybe 3 hours, we want those levels to be back to where they were. And anytime we eat a meal, even if it's not really a carbohydrate-based meal, our blood glucose levels are going to increase. So we're not looking for them to flatline, right? That's just a part of life. They will undulate, but that's what we want, is an undulation. And what we don't want is this massive high followed by the crash, and it's that the crash, the kind of the high followed by the low, that can be the most disruptive piece. And really it can be super empowering to get to know your own blood glucose levels and actually test those and get curious and see, okay, what are my blood sugar levels before I eat? Are you fasted? What are they an hour later? So let's see kind of what the postprandial effect is. Like, let's see what the my levels are after eating and the impact that it's had, and see if it's shot up, or if it's kind of, you know, up here somewhere. And then let's test it, you know, maybe another hour or two later, and see, are they here? Have they gone down? And just start to get a sense for yourself of where on that blood sugar roller coaster you sit. Are you gently undulating, or are you like really on the highs and lows? Because if you're on the highs and lows, then probably you want to be thinking about making some adaptations to what you're eating and your lifestyle.
Yeah, you can get one of those glucose monitors from your local drugstore to get that, and also they have the continuous glucose monitors, which you can get from your physician as a prescription if they see there's something out of balance, or there's many companies that you can look into for the continuous glucose monitors. Now it seems to be all the rage of all,
Oh yeah,
like pro athletes and things like that. Companies like Levels and many other ones on there. So I think it's NutriSense. No,
got one
don't.
here called Jerry, I think it's called.
There, yeah. So definitely, but to start with, just like a glucose monitor, which is inexpensive. You don't need to go on like one of those very expensive continuous glucose monitors. Even those ones, you can do like a little a trial for a couple weeks, and you know, pop it on your arm there and see how it goes. So let's talk about the A1C, why that's important to look at that.
Yeah, so hemoglobin A1C or HbA1c is it's a helpful marker, and it's one that we will often look at because it gives us an approximate indication of what someone's blood glucose levels might have been like over time, i.e. over the last 3 months. And the reason for that is because the sugar, the glucose molecules will attach to hemoglobin in the bloodstream, and so you by measuring the A1C in your hemoglobin, then it gives an indication as to what your blood sugar has been for the life cycle of that red blood cell, which is around about 3 months. So HbA1c is typically the marker that physicians would use as a diagnostic tool to help with looking at diabetes or pre-diabetes. And really what we can learn from this is if someone's HbA1c is kind of sitting up higher than the optimal range, then we probably want to act now. It's maybe a bit of a warning sign. If it's sitting up super high, then that's a act now, right? Like this is a sign that you could be on a one-track road to all of those conditions that we spoke about before, in terms of the things that the big diseases in the Western world. And I mean, diabetes levels are just off the charts, right? In the UK now, in Western Europe, in the States, in North America, it's out of control. And so this is one of the markers that can help us to identify whether this is something that you need to work on. I think the only downside to the HbA1c is that sometimes I find that if someone's markers are like that high low, then that might average out the HbA1c to make it not look as bad as what it is. But for the most part, it is quite a handy tool, because if someone's blood sugars are dysregulated, then the highs will drag the A1c up.
Yeah, and if you've got metabolic, disease, you've got diabetes or obesity, you've got, blood pressure issues, all of these things are factors for your hormones and your fertility. And again, like that, the diminished ovarian reserve, the premature ovarian insufficiency, the low AMH and high FSH, like we've got to dig in and look at your health before we run over to IVF and you're being pushed into a donor egg situation. I've seen many people talk to on a regular basis that they've gone to the donor egg side of things, and it didn't work. They think when we choose that, that's a done deal, and it's just not the case. So, what's the ideal here for A1C from a functional optimal level, and then the functional the Western ranges? What are we seeing?
Yeah, so usually the Western ranges are looking at up to 8%. Again, this is talking about US North American measures. But the ideal in terms of functional ranges would be 4.5 to 5.5. So if you're sitting comfortably within that range, then probably you can give yourself a pat on the back and think about the things to celebrate. But if you're pushing up towards that 5.5 and above, and then probably this is a warning sign that we need to act on this, right? Let's listen to the body, and this is the blood doesn't lie, right? And so let's work on this and know it as a marker. But I think also really important to know that sometimes we need to take that person's clinical presentation into account as well, because sometimes people might be sitting within that range, but actually in terms of their clinical symptoms, they're showing all the signs of blood sugar imbalances, like the hanger and the shakes and all of those kind of things. And so we need to actually make sure that we're catering for that as well as just the bloods. We need to map it all together.
So some symptoms of the high blood sugar would be fatigue or chronic fatigue syndrome, low energy, sugar or carb cravings, excessive thirst, weight fluctuations, weight loss, increased urination, headaches, and trouble concentrating. And then the low piece, this is where we up high and then low, mood swings, nervousness, jitteriness, blurred or worsening vision, slow healing of wounds, kind of dryness, cuts and bruises, frequent infections, heavy breathing and trouble exercising, tension headaches and sweating, that extreme hunger and that slight nausea where you're like, oh my God, I gotta eat or I'm just gonna throw up. Anything you wanted to say on those?
Yeah, you just reminded me, actually. I had a really weird thing last week, Sarah, when this was my first ever experience of this, so it's very strange. But I clearly had low blood sugars, and this was just a week ago. I went to a really intense workout, strength workout in the evening, and I came back and had my dinner, but it was a low carb dinner. And I was sitting there afterwards on the sofa. I was just watching TV with my husband and started getting blurred vision.
Oh.
And I was like, what is this? It was really disconcerting. It was like I was having some kind of like hallucinations. I was like, this is really weird. And this has never happened to me before. And I was like, maybe my blood sugars are low. I'm gonna go. I went and ate some emergency chocolate, and sure enough, like I was absolutely fine within about 3 minutes. So it's these are very real signs. That our blood sugars could be out of balance, and so they're worth listening to your body if you do get things like that.
Yeah, like mine will go into the extreme hunger, the mood swings. I'll be just like a crazy person.
Like my husband will, like, even if I'm in the middle of cooking dinner, if he's hungry, he needs to eat now. Like, he will be ravaging the cupboards as I'm cooking. I'm like, dude, it's going to be ready in 5 minutes, and he's like, I don't care.
I know it's like all this stuff I know, because now if you like start the day off with some, if you have hard-boiled eggs or some, even when I was in Italy, I was like hard-boiled eggs and I'd have all their meats and stuff like that. I could go for ages. Or if I started off where it was interesting too, because in Italy, they literally had the meats and the cheeses, all that sort of stuff. So I didn't have the cheese, but then they'd have their sweet table. I'm like with the croissants and the apple cakes and all the different, and I literally go to people's plates and it's loaded up with all these Italian desserts. And I was like, oh, they look so good. But I'm like, yeah, you're going to be hungry in about an hour because that stuff is just, yeah, going to spike you right up. Whereas mine, I'm like, I'd have all these meats, the protein, and literally I could go for like 5 hours and feel totally normal.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it's that what you break your fast with first thing in the morning, that is literally what sets the precedent for the rest of the day, right? People talk to me about the classic one is the 4 p.m. slump, right? And when people at work, they're in the office and all of a sudden that's the time that they need that, this is when the biscuits come out and the donuts and the cake and all the rest of it in the office. It's such a classic one. And people always say, well, what do I do? How can I stop those cravings at 4 p.m.? What do I do at 4 p.m.? And it's not what you do at 4 p.m. It's what you do actually at the start of the day. Like, let's start with breakfast. Let's start with what are you having for breakfast? Because if it's just carbohydrates with nothing else, then you're going to need to switch that up. And, ideally have a savory breakfast and a protein-based breakfast. But if you just can't handle a savory breakfast for whatever reason, then we need to really dress those carbs up with as much protein as we can.
Yeah, it's interesting how you just make some tweaks, right? You think you're just like a person that's always hungry, or you can't shift the weight, or it's all, and like you say, you start at the very beginning. So let's talk about some strategies of how to balance the blood sugar. So let's start with our diet. What are some recommendations to do there?
Yeah, so I think a good starting point is just thinking about this concept of the glycemic load, right? And so I don't think you need to necessarily study foods to check their glycemic index for everything, but it's just worth knowing that every food does sit somewhere on the glycemic index. And so if you've and even if that language doesn't appeal to you and you're just checking ingredients, things like all food labels, if you're looking at packaging, will have a per 100 grams, it will say how many grams of carbohydrate, and then it will say of which sugars. And I'm assuming the labeling is the same in North America, right? And so ultimately, if you've got like out of 100 grams, if you've got something that's like 20 grams of sugar, then that's a lot, right? I guess it's just worth starting to actually get to know what you're putting into your body and starting to think, okay, maybe we can reduce that sugar piece and the carbohydrates that turn into sugar. And a part of it is, so I know that we can then get caught in these mindsets of restriction and having to kind of how much stuff am I going to have to give up, but it's not about that. And you can include so many delicious foods as part of a blood sugar balancing diet, and they would really be thinking about like fiber. So when we're thinking about the carbohydrates, it's higher in fiber is better, and because it's the fiber helps to actually drag and slow down the release of that sugar. So I said at the start, all carbohydrate does turn into glucose ultimately, but the carbohydrates that are higher in fiber will reduce the speed at which that glucose is released into the bloodstream. So it's not this big flood that we spoke about. The other things include like protein, like dressing your carbohydrates. So never eating naked carbs. So over here, for example, coming back to the breakfast foods, porridge is a really popular breakfast here in the UK, or oatmeal. And oats are widely considered a healthy food. I've got mixed feelings about oats, but it's if you are having oats, you've got to dress it up with carbohydrate, with protein and fat. You have to, because if you're just having, so many people just have plain oatmeal with water for breakfast and think, oh, this is a super low calorie, like I'm having such a healthy breakfast here. And actually it's like, that is going to spike your blood sugars, and then you're on the blood sugar roller coaster for the rest of the day. So things like nuts and nut butters and seeds, all of those things, if you tolerate dairy, so some yogurt or some coconut yogurt or whatever it might be, to just start to introduce more, even like some protein powder if you need to, or collagen powder. Those kind of things can help to just redress that balance of carbohydrate to protein and fat. And if you're doing that right, then you're going to be stable. But you need to experiment and get curious with it, because there's no prescribed approach. There's no one size fits all approach here. We're all different in terms of our tolerance to carbohydrates and our body's reaction. So you need to get curious.
Yeah, definitely check out our fertility diet freebie. So you go to fertility diet freebie, and there's a 5-day meal plan, grocery shopping list, and we have breakfast, actually breakfast hash, which can be really good. So with some meat and veggies, and even some starches. So some sweet potato, or yeah, I think there's sweet potato on that one. So a number of different breakfast options. So it's not, we get into more of that savory side of things, and then yeah, there's some sausage patties. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there that you could do a little bit of batch cooking, have it, and it's like super easy. You whip it in, and you feel like you're in a 5-star restaurant, because it was developed with a chef and myself. So I did all the testing, and she developed the meals. So definitely check out the fertility diet freebie. And so we get away from that sweet start, right? There is some smoothies in there, but yeah, you want to make sure that you put the collagen powder, or you can add in additional protein powder, and some of those. It is free of nuts, so you could do like a sunflower seed thing, but look at that. And no eggs either, because those are top allergens. And some of the oats, right? If you're highly intolerant to gluten, even gluten-free oats can cause reactions. So I had someone saying, hey, I went gluten-free, and then I started having oats and started getting canker sores. Maybe a clue that's that maybe those oats are contaminated with gluten. So we see that a lot. And so using apple cider vinegar can help reduce the glycemic index of food. So even having a shot of that beforehand, or just sprinkling that on your salad is good. Cinnamon, putting that on your sweet potatoes, or putting that on food, can help with blood sugar, and going grain-free.
There's some evidence even to suggest that the order in which you eat your foods can make a difference. And so starting with your leafy greens, and then having your protein, and then having your starches at the end of the meal, that can help to, again, just slow down that release of sugar into the bloodstream.
That's why you go to a restaurant, they want to start with your salad. Mm-hmm. Eat more salad, then you can't eat all the junk that they bring in later. And then, so carbs are not, like we said, carbs are not the villain here, but, what's your take on carbs?
Yeah, I think it's really important. This is where an individualized approach comes in, right? Because there is no one size fits all. Some people will happily tolerate a diet that contains, quite a bit of carbohydrate, and I think for most people who don't have too much of a blood sugar issue, my general guidance would be maybe in terms of proportions, a quarter of your plate could be carbohydrate, right? But let's not forget that carbohydrate can come from all sorts of different vegetables. It can come from some whole grains, like especially things like quinoa are nice because they're higher in protein. But also, again, if you tolerate them, beans, pulses, legumes, lentils, those kind of foods, I know they're always dubbed as sources of protein for vegetarians. And yes, they do contain some protein, but they also contain complex carbs. So they would go towards your carbohydrate quota as well. So, I guess it's really important to note for a lot of vegetarians. I always use this example of dal, so thinking about lentils and rice. Like lots of people might have rice and then dal, and actually that's quite a lot of carbohydrates. So it might be actually that you just have the dal, the lentil dal, and then add a few nice things into that, rather than having it with the rice. So again, it's roughly speaking, most people can tolerate about a quarter. But if you've got like metabolic syndrome, if you're on this higher glycemic pathway, then actually that might be too much for you. You might not be able to tolerate that much carbohydrate, and it may be that you need to go a bit lower. I think there's a danger in just saying carb free, or no to very low carbs, and that is that maybe then you're missing out on some of the really important fiber rich foods that will feed the gut microbiome. So I'm always cautious about the ketogenic diet unless there's a very clear clinical indicator to do that, and that's because we know from studies that that the gut microbiome can be negatively impacted by doing an exclusive ketogenic diet. So I think the keto has a time and a place under the right conditions, but if it's purely to manage your blood sugars, then actually we want you to be able to tolerate some carbohydrate, but we need to figure out what your individual tolerance is and work from there.
Yeah, so it is kind of, yeah, exactly. Taking that personalized approach. If you're married to a vegan, carnivore, paleo, these different diets, right? It's those diets that work for someone, but are they right for you? And sort of having some flexibility there, obviously for religious reasons, we don't want you doing something that's against that doesn't feel right for your faith, but it's like to have some flexibility around what it is you're doing. And is that really right for you? And is it right for your fertility? And so there's things we can do when we balance blood sugar. Some very, simple strategies here, getting the glucose meter, and then, not starting the day with a starchy muffin or a big bowl of oatmeal, looking at more of that breakfast hash. Definitely check out that fertility diet freebie. You can download that, all new summer recipes going on right there right now. Katie, any final thoughts here on blood sugar for us?
I think you've summarised it really nicely, Sarah. Yeah, I think that's it's the personalised approach, getting to know you and your body, and just making sure. I think take home message for anybody listening today is just don't have your carbs naked. Always dress them up with some protein and fat, and then monitor your body's response.
Awesome. Don't go naked. Okay. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, Sarah.